Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for coming here this afternoon. My name is Carl Adamson. I'm a senior librarian at the National Library Service. And in our continuing efforts to inform the public on trending topics, we're here this afternoon to present a lecture on Barbados Republic. And to present this lecture this afternoon will be Mr. David Comissiong. All of us know a lot of Mr. Comissiong. He has done a lot in the community, and he's quite prominent in areas of politics, and he's one of those people that knows a lot about the Republic. So help me in helping Mr. Comissiong come to the podium. I want to thank you.
I would like to sincerely thank Mr. Carl Adamson and the National Library Service for inviting me to deliver this Republic lecture. I would also like to congratulate the National Library Service for showing initiative and playing its part in helping to educate and inform the Barbadian people about our impending Republic of Barbados. And that's the text of my talk, the journey to the Republic of Barbados. We are going to explore Barbados's journey from its earliest history to its becoming a full-fledged republic on the 30th of November 2021. But before we do so, let us establish the definition of a republic so that we can keep that definition in the back of our minds as we explore our journey to the republic. Now, in order to properly understand what a republic is, one must begin with an understanding of the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the power of a state or a nation to do everything necessary to govern itself. And so a republic is a state or a nation in which sovereignty, the power to carry out all governmental functions, is vested in the people, in all of the people as a collective body. A republic is therefore a state or a nation in which supreme power is held by the collective body of the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or democratically nominated president as its head of state rather than a monarch or some other non-elected hereditary head of state. So let's just keep that definition in mind as we go through the history of Barbados. So let us commence our historical journey by going back to that period in history when the then colony of Barbados was on the verge of gaining its independence from Britain. Let's go back to the year 1964. I have here with me a photocopy of a 5th of January 2003 edition of the Nation newspaper of Barbados. And that newspaper reprinted an article from Britain's Guardian newspaper about some secret documents that had just been declassified by the British government and made public for the first time. And those documents were about Barbados's impending independence. So the article is entitled Report Barbados more like Britain. And I'm going to quote from that article. This is what it said. The Duke of Edinburgh urged former British Prime Minister Harold Wilson to deny the West Indian island of Barbados full independence. Papers just released by the Public Record Office revealed the royal family's correspondence with Downing Street during the 1960s. Downing Street is the office of the Prime Minister. Returning from a royal tour in November 1964, Prince Philip sent a covering note accompanied by his reflections. Then he added, and quote, "I have put down some notes about the West Indian islands. Once read, the papers," he suggested, "should be burnt." On the political future of Barbados, he said, and I quote, "Whatever the politicians may say, there seems to be little demand for or interest in complete independence. In fact, I got the impression that the islanders saw their relationship to Britain to be much the same as the relationship between the Scilly or Channel Islands and Britain." The Channel Islands are some small British dependencies in the English Channel between England and France. And he goes on, "After all, Barbados, for instance, has never been anything but British since it was settled more than 300 years ago. It seemed quite obvious to me they were far more attached to Britain than they were to each other." End of quote. So that is Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, in 1964 trying to convince the Prime Minister of Britain not to grant Barbados independence. And in his view, the Barbadian people were more attached to Britain than they were to one another. Imagine that. So, who was this Prince Philip, this Duke of Edinburgh? And why was he so opposed to Barbados gaining its independence in 1966? Well, Prince Philip's main claim to fame, that he was the third cousin and the husband of Queen Elizabeth II. They were married to each other in 1947 when she was simply Princess Elizabeth. And he, by marrying her, moved from the margins of the British royal family to a central position as a member of the British royal family. His wife, Princess Elizabeth of the House of Windsor. The House of Windsor is a branch of the British royal family. She became Queen of England and therefore Queen of England's colonies in 1952. So when Prince Philip was urging the British Prime Minister in 1964 to deny independence to the then British colony of Barbados, he was doing so in his capacity as husband and consort of Britain's monarch or head of state. Now, a royal family is a family which claims that it possesses the right to reign or rule over a nation or a people by hereditary right. That is, that it possesses this rulership position not on the basis of anybody voting for it, but simply on the basis of family. It is a right that is automatically passed on from parent to child. Nothing to do with the people voting for them to have that position. The now 95-year-old Queen Elizabeth II is the current monarch of Britain and is the head of that branch of the British royal family that is known as the House of Windsor. That branch of the British royal family has been occupying the throne or the monarchy of Britain since 1910, beginning with this Queen's grandfather, King George V. But the British royal family as a whole, inclusive of such other branches as the Hanoverians, the Stuarts, the Tudors, and the Normans, have held the throne or monarchy of Britain since the year 1066. This was the year in which a powerful warlord named the Duke of Normandy. Normandy is a region in northern France. In 1066, the Duke of Normandy, William, invaded England, conquered the country, and installed himself as king or monarch of England. King William I, also known as William the Conqueror, and also installed his family as the originating branch of the currently existing English royal family. So that's how it started. It started with a warlord and an act of conquest in 1066. And since then, that family has been installed as the ruling monarchy of Britain. So, when did the island of Barbados first come into connection with the British royal family? Let us have a look at that, but before doing so, I want to make the point that the original name of our island was not Barbados. The original name of our island was Ichiruganame. Ichiruganame. And it was named so by its original owners and occupiers. And who were the original owners and occupiers of Barbados? Well, the Amerindian people, the native indigenous people of our region. They were occupying and owning Barbados from as early as 1630 before Christ, BC. And we have signs of their habitations at Haywoods, Silver Sands, Welch's, Spring Garden, Fontebelle, Greenland, and several other sites across Barbados. And the fact that they no longer exist in Barbados is because after Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean in 1492, set in train a whole process of enslavement and oppression of the native people, the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors periodically came to the island of Barbados, found the indigenous people there, enslaved them, kidnapped them, shipped them off of Barbados to other Spanish colonies where they will work to death as slaves. So we need to be conscious that these were actually the original owners of Barbados, and that our modern history on this island began with a crime against humanity, a genocide against the indigenous people of Ichiruganame. Now, let us take a quick look at how Barbados first came into connection with the British monarchy. and permit me to refer you to a very famous book, a very famous 19th century book about Barbados. That book is entitled The History of Barbados, and it's written by a man called Robert Schomburg. Robert Schomburg was of German and English ethnicity, nationality, was sent to Barbados by the British government in the 19th century, and wrote and did his research in Barbados, wrote an extensive book about the history and the geography and everything else about Barbados. So, how did Barbados first come into connection with the English monarchy? This is what Schomburg tells us in his history, and I quote, "The first English vessel which touched at Barbados appears to have been the Olive Blossom on 14th April 1605. The crew took possession of the country by erecting a cross. They also cut upon the bark of a tree which stood near, quote, James K. of E. and this island, end of quote. That is, James, King of England and this island, end of quote. So here we have the notion that the island belongs to the then ruling King of England, King James I. He was actually the first monarch of the Stuart branch of the British royal family. And then in 1625, Sir William Courtine, a merchant of London, received accounts respecting the fertility and the commodious situation of the island, and he established a plan of forming a settlement in Barbados. And very importantly, Lord Leigh, also known as the Earl of Marlborough, the Lord High Treasurer of England, and I quote from Schomburg, the Earl of Marlborough applied to James I for a patent to secure the island to him and his heirs forever, end of quote. And so under the protection of the Earl of Marlborough, Sir William Courtine sent ships to Barbados to commence a settlement. And again, Schomburg tells us, quote, of these ships, one, the William and John, commanded by John Powell, arrived on the 17th of February 1625 in Barbados and landed on the leeward side of the island 40 English, it means 40 English men, with 7 or 8 Negroes, end of quote. When he says 7 or 8 Negroes, he means 7 or 8 enslaved Africans, slaves. So here we have the schema of the foundation and design of Barbados's original system of colonial domination, what I call the original system of unfreedom. First, you have the appropriation of ownership of the island by the monarch or royal family of England. Secondly, you have the monarch purporting to grant a patent over the island to one man, thereby purporting to make this man the Lord Proprietor of the island, the autocratic master of the island. And thirdly, you have the establishment of slavery, African slavery. You have the establishment of a class of English or European slave owners and a class of black or African slaves. So these are the three pillars of Barbados's original on freedom, Barbados's system of colonial domination. And between these three pillars, you create a society in which many of the inhabitants of Barbados, the majority actually, and the black majority in particular, possess little or no rights. Well, the Lord Proprietorship pillar did not last very long. By 1663, the patent, which had ultimately been vested in the Earl of Carlisle, was effectively nullified, and the monarch resumed full title to the plantation colony. However, by 1663, the English monarchy pillar had lost a significant portion of its absolute power. By 1663, before, the English kings were totally all-powerful. They ruled England with absolute power. But by 1663, England had started its own journey towards a constitutional monarchy, with power being shared between the monarch on the one hand and the elected English Parliament, the British Prime Minister, other British ministers of government on the other hand. And this journey towards a constitutional monarchy where power in Britain was now shared between the monarchy and the parliament and ministers, that was solidified in something called the Glorious Revolution in England in 1688. But it's important to note that even though the British Parliament and British Prime Minister and ministers were getting more power, that the British monarch still retained very significant powers and very considerable influence, not only in Britain, but also in Britain's colonies like Barbados. And what about the third pillar of that on freedom? The slave-owning oligarchy. Well, by 1663, the power of the slave-owning oligarchy in Barbados had increased immensely. In fact, by 1663, Barbados had become the world's first slave society, with a powerful slave-owning white plantocracy entrenched in power and dominating the local whites-only House of Assembly. Now, why do I say that Barbados was the world's first slave society? I mean, there were societies before Barbados in human history that had slaves, or of which slavery was a feature. But Barbados was the first society in the entire span of human history that was constructed totally, absolutely, completely on the basis of slavery. Slavery was the foundation of everything in Barbados: the economy, the social structure, the ideology of the society, the very means of sustainability of the island. Everything was centered around slavery. And the world had never seen anything like that before. Barbados was the first. And furthermore, the monarchy principle pillar of our on freedom and the slavery pillar of our on freedom were actually partnering and reinforcing each other. Indeed, and Barbadians need to be aware of this, the British monarchy, the British royal family, was at the heart of the establishment and development of the system of African enslavement. Let us be very factual about this. Britain first got involved in the enslavement of the people of Africa in 1562. when Captain John Hawkins, a British sea captain, led the first slave raiding expedition to the west coast of Africa. 1562. He sailed from England to West Africa, attacking and destroying many towns and villages along the west coast of Africa, capturing people, Africans, and enslaving them. That expedition was approved by Queen Elizabeth I, the then monarch of Britain. Not only did she approve it, but she sent a slave ship of her own as part of the expedition. The name of that slave ship was the Jesus of Lubeck. Imagine that, huh? So it begins with Queen Elizabeth I and Captain John Hawkins. Incidentally, she later knighted Captain John Hawkins for his services to Britain. Her successor, King James I, 1618, he granted control of Britain's Africa trade, inclusive of the slave trade, to a new company that he established, the Company of Adventurers to Guinea and Benin. His son, 1632, King Charles I, he granted a license to transport slaves from Guinea. He granted that license to a syndicate of British merchants and received donations of thousands of pounds. In 1660, Charles I's child, King Charles II, he established a company known as the Royal Adventurers into Africa to engage in the slave trade. And then in 1672, he gave a charter to the Royal African Company, probably the world's greatest slave trading enterprise, a company that brought thousands and thousands of enslaved Africans to Barbados. And that's King Charles II. And if we go into the 18th century, the 1700s, Queen Anne, King George I, King George III, King William IV, and we can go on and on. All of them were implicated in that whole system of African enslavement and slave trade. So let's do a little recap then. By the end of the 17th century, the situation in Barbados was as follows. Firstly, Barbados was a colony of Britain ruled over by the British government, and that rulership consisted of 1, the British monarch or head of state; 2, the British Parliament. British Parliament could make laws for Barbados. 3, the British ministers of government, inclusive of a prime minister and a secretary of state or a minister of the colonies. And 4, a British governor who was stationed in Barbados and who was the representative in Barbados of the British government. In addition, Barbados also did have a modicum of local self-government. So it wasn't just rulership from Britain. Barbados did have a modicum, some local self-government, but this was totally dominated by the white Barbadian slave-owning plantocracy, who dominated the local House of Assembly. A House of Assembly that prohibited, first of all, enslaved persons. It prohibited free blacks, free coloreds, women or poor whites from qualifying for membership or for voting for members of the House of Assembly. So let's be very clear. Also, a House of Assembly that used its powers to impose severe repression and exploitation on the large non-white mass of the Barbadian people. And needless to say, at the very bottom of the whole structure was the mass of enslaved black Barbadians who were denied personal freedom, denied participation in the civic life of the country, excluded from participation in activities that could advance them economically, subjected to extreme impoverishment, and also subjected to an extremely harsh and bloody system of regimentation and criminal law. This then was the old colonial system. And this system was the antithesis, the absolute opposite of a republic. Remember, a republic is a state in which power and sovereignty is vested in the people. That old colonial system is the opposite. Is the opposite of a state in which power and sovereignty is vested in the masses of the people. And so the fundamental issue we must now quickly elucidate is, how did the masses of the Barbadian people transform Barbados from that oppressive, elitist, oligarchical, unrepresentative, inhumane society into an independent nation in which most official power and authority is vested in the people and in their representatives, the members of parliament and the ministers of government that we, the people, freely elect in periodic elections. And I deliberately said most official power and authority, because until we officially install President-elect Dame Sandra Mason as President of Barbados on the 30th of November, we are still in a constitutional situation in which the monarch of Britain, Queen Elizabeth II, still possesses some important functions and powers in our system of governance. And she possesses those functions and powers even though she is not a Barbadian, and even though the people of Barbados have never elected, voted, or appointed her to carry out such functions. So the big question for us is, how did we transform from that ugly old colonial system to the Barbados that we live in today? And I will, because of scarcity of time, I can't dwell long on this, but I will just list for you the major milestones. And I must say that the major component of Barbados' struggle towards a republican type of state in which sovereignty resides in the Barbadian people, the major component of that struggle consisted of the struggle against slavery. Because think about it. If the majority of your people are reduced to slaves with no rights, how can you be anything? How can you be a republic of people power? So the most important component of our struggle was the struggle to destroy the system of slavery. And that was a long and intense struggle in Barbados. It started in 1649, the first revolt, a revolt involving African slaves as well as white indentured servants. Small, very small revolt. Then in 1675, we had the first island-wide slave conspiracy. 1675, the enslaved Africans of Barbados hatched a plan, an island-wide plan to rise up, to destroy slavery, to take over the island, and incidentally, to elevate one of their own, a Gold Coast, an African from the Gold Coast, what is today known as Ghana, to elevate him to be the monarch of Barbados. He was going to be King Cuffy. So King Cuffy is one of the heroes of our struggle towards a republic. But I also want to bring to your attention another Barbadian personality associated with that 1675 slave conspiracy. Now, the conspiracy was discovered. It was actually sold out. It was discovered. And the white plantocracy declared martial law, arrested well over 100 of the conspirators, and began to subject them to a process of interrogation, torture, trial, and execution. Now, I write about this in my book called Reasonings with the Youth, and I just want to quickly give you a little quotation from this book to tell you about an African Barbadian named Tony, who is a very important hero of our republic. And I'm quoting from the book, right? So, 100 African Barbadian suspects arrested, subjected to a barbaric process of interrogation, torture, execution. Several of them burnt alive, several of them beheaded and dragged through the streets of Speightstown. And I quote now, "It was against this background of utter horror and barbarity that the shining, imperishable heroism of an African Barbadian revolutionary hero known simply as Tony emerged. Tony was in the presence of another condemned rebel who was being prepared for death by burning." We're talking about burning at the stake, huh? The provost marshal or superintendent of security was in attendance, and he proceeded to urge this unfortunate man to confess and to name others before he died. The obviously terrorized black man responded by calling for water, a sign that he was prepared to speak and to divulge information. Thereupon, Tony immediately spoke up and admonished him as follows, and I quote, these are Tony's words: "Thou fool, are there not enough of our countrymen killed already? Art thou minded to kill them all?" End of quote. This rebuke caused the condemned man to remain silent. And in obvious resentment, one of the white spectators shouted to Tony, and I quote, "Tony Sirrah, we shall see you fry bravely by and by," end of quote. Tony's response to this threat of the most horrible death imaginable was to declare proudly and defiantly, and I quote, "If you roast me today, you cannot roast me tomorrow," and to bid the executioner to proceed. Tony was burnt to death, one of 42 heroes who were executed for having the audacity to claim their freedom and dignity. You know, what I am relating there in that book is what came out of a publication at the time in England, a contemporary publication, news about the insurrection in Barbados. When I read about Tony facing such an unimaginable death, but having the courage to step forward to try to save his fellow rebels from themselves being discovered and executed. That's a hero. That's a hero of our republic. So that's the 1675 plot. Then there's a 1683 plot involving mainly Africa-born slaves. There's the 1692 plot, an Afro-Creole plot, led by Barbados-born enslaved Africans known as Ben, Sambo, Hammond, and Sampson, once again betrayed by an informant. In 1701, there was another major Afro-Creole plot involving hundreds of conspirators. And then finally, in 1816, the Bussa Rebellion, centered in St. Philip, but engulfing half of the island and producing such heroes as Nanny Gregg, Jackie, Cain Davis, Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin, and of course, General Bussa. So we all know about, and this was important, because this was the first major slave rebellion of the 19th century. And this slave rebellion played a big role in bringing about the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1834. And we know a lot about General Bussa, who is right excellent. General Bussa, national hero. But we need to know more about the female, Nanny Gregg, because Nanny Gregg was the ideologue of the revolution. She was the one who urged the enslaved to rebel. And I just want to share quickly with you as well from this book. This is a book called Contrary Voices, Representations of West Indian Slavery by Karina Williamson. And this book reproduces the text of the Commission of Inquiry that the Barbados House of Assembly set up to look into the Bussa Rebellion. And that Commission of Inquiry took evidence from various enslaved persons. And I want to quote to you the evidence taken from Robert, a slave belonging to the plantation called Simmons. And this is what Robert said. Robert, who saith that sometime the last year he heard the Negroes were all to be freed on New Year's Day, that Nanny Gregg, a Negro woman at Simmons who said she could read, she was the first person who told the Negroes at Simmons so. And she said she had read it in the newspapers and that her master was very uneasy at it. She was always talking about it to the Negroes and told them that they were all damned fools to work, for that she would not, as freedom they were sure to get. About a fortnight after New Year's Day, she said the Negroes were to be freed on Easter Monday, and the only way to get it was to fight for it. Otherwise, they would not get it. And the way they were to do was to set fire, as that was the way they did in Saint Domingo, end of quote. Saint Domingo was Haiti. So Nanny knew about the Haitian Revolution. Nanny Gregg was inspired by the Haitian Revolution and used that as the example to encourage the enslaved, her fellow enslaved Barbadians to rebel. So I'm saying that if we want to look at the struggle towards the republic, that struggle against slavery is critical. And that achievement of the abolition of slavery between 1834 and 1838 is crucial. That is the foundation of everything else. That is the foundation of independence. That is the foundation of civil rights, human rights, and ultimately the foundation of the republic. 1843, election of the first man of African descent to the House of Assembly, Samuel Jackman Prescott. Very important. We make a breakthrough in what was then, all those centuries, a white, totally white-dominated House of Assembly. Samuel Jackman Prescott, the first black man to enter that. 1876, the Confederation riots in Barbados, also known as the War of General Greene. Well, the Bussa Rebellion, the people had to come out and rebel in order to get some progress. And then after we achieved the abolition of slavery, the process stalled again. People had to come out and rebel again. 60 years later, 1876. 1924, establishment by the Right Excellent Dr. Charles Duncan O'Neill of the Democratic League. Very important. Black people now starting to form political and industrial organizations, the Democratic League. 1937, the Peoples Uprising, catalyzed by Right Excellent Clement Payne. Once again, the progress had stalled. Again, the people had to come out onto the streets to rebel, to get the progress going, to get that stalled progress going again. Always the colonial, the elites at top periodically need to get that message from the people at the bottom. You must do something to take us forward from on top, or we will do it. We will do it by revolutionary action from the bottom. 1938, establishment of the Barbados Progressive League, also known as the Barbados Labour Party. People like Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, Right Excellent Sir Hugh Springer coming onto the stage. The first modern organized political party. 1941, establishment of the Barbados Workers' Union. We now have black people coming together in industrial organization, trade unions. Right Excellent Sir Frank Walcott. 1945, attainment of women's suffrage. All those centuries, no woman could vote. Not even the white women. Not even the slave-owning white women. It took us until 1945 when women finally got the vote. 1946, the Bush experiment in responsible government. Well, that's a step forward, because what that says is not only are black people now being elected to the House of Assembly, but under the Bush experiment, those black parliamentarians are now being given the responsibility of what amongst a government minister to actually run things in Barbados. 1951, the attainment of full universal adult suffrage. One man, one woman, one vote. So the masses of people are now fully on the political stage. 1954, establishment of full cabinet government. So black governments now fully taking control of the reins of government, the powers of government, and using those powers now to lift up the people, to, develop health care and education services and expand job opportunities. 1955, establishment of the Democratic Labour Party. Errol Barrow comes onto the scene, and we now have the two-party system. And 1966, the attainment of independence. We become independent. We move away from that structure where it is the British Parliament, the British Prime Minister, the British Secretary of State for the colonies, the British governor controlling us. We break that. But we make two compromises. The two compromises we make are that we don't totally break away our legal system from Britain. We get our independence, but we compromise and say, okay, the British Privy Council will remain our highest court of appeal. And the second compromise we make we say the British monarch will remain our head of state. So those are the two compromises that we made in 1966. In 2005, we dealt with one of those compromises when we moved Barbados away from the British Privy Council. We established the Caribbean Court of Justice, and we made the Caribbean Court of Justice our highest court of our country. So there was only one compromise remaining. The one compromise remaining was the monarch of England still occupying that position as the head of state of Barbados. And some people say, it's just symbolic. No, it's not just symbolic. It's symbolic, but in addition to symbolism, the monarch has real powers. I mean, it is the monarch and her local representative, the Governor General, who first of all, who sets up a local privy council that has the power to determine if a sentence is to be commuted. The monarch, acting through her local representative, the Governor General, has the power to determine which elected parliamentarian has the majority support, that should be the Prime Minister, or who should be the leader of the opposition. I mean, so they're very important functions. Granted, nowhere near as much power as a Prime Minister or as the cabinet, but still important functions in our system of governance. And so we are now making the final break with British power. And that final break is to say, look, those functions that are now vested in the British monarch and that are exercised by the British monarch's representative, the Governor General, we are taking all of those functions, we are excluding the British monarch from our constitutional arrangements, and we are establishing our own Barbadian head of state. And not only will it be a Barbadian, but we are moving away from the hereditary principle, because the British monarch was founded on the hereditary principle. Nobody voted for them. Nobody votes for them. This is about family privilege. We are moving away from any concept of family privilege. We will have a president that the people of Barbados will elect. Not directly, but elect indirectly, in the sense that the people of Barbados will vote in elections for who will be our members of parliament, and our members of parliament in turn will be invested with the power to elect the president, our head of state. So indirectly, it is still coming from the people, because we, in a sense, we elect the electors who will then elect the head of state. And so we are coming to the end of a near 400-year-long journey towards a republic. It will all culminate on the 30th of November. And of course, the path to the 30th of November 2021 was cleared when our current government, led by Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley, introduced a constitution amendment bill in our parliament on the 20th of September 2021. The bill was passed and enacted into law on the 6th of October 2021, and under the authority of that new act of parliament, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, Bishop Joseph Atherley, both nominated Dame Sandra Mason as their choice for the post of President of Barbados, and the combined members of the House of Assembly and the Senate approved that joint nomination with a vote that exceeded a 2/3 majority. So we now have our president-elect, and on the 30th of November, she will be installed as the first president of Barbados. And we have to give a lot of credit to Prime Minister Motley for completing a job that many other leaders before her had promised to complete, but for some reason did not do. She has brought it to conclusion, but it's also a tribute to the maturation of the people of Barbados. We have our consciousness, we have evolved, our sense of identity, our self-confidence as a people has brought us to this position where in the year 2021, we say we wish to be in total control of our own affairs. We do not need any British monarch to be having any kind of role in our own national constitutional affairs. After all, we have no role in Britain's constitutional affairs. But the end of the journey to the Republic is also the beginning of the journey of the Republic. The end of the journey to the Republic is also the beginning of the journey of the Republic. And so the question arises, what are we Barbadians going to make of our new Republic? Permit me, therefore, to conclude with this Republic challenge to the people of Barbados, my fellow citizens. Let me put it in these terms. The sufferings of our ancestors was so great. The sacrifices that they made were so monumental. And the aspiration that they manifested when they set out to destroy the evil system of slavery and other forms of oppression, that aspiration was so toweringly magnificent that we, their descendants, are now under a duty to similarly unite and to attempt to do something that is truly significant and meaningful, something magnificent for and with ourselves and our nation. And could that magnificent something be to unite in order to transform our country into a proud, conscious, and self-respecting republic? A republic that is characterized not merely by the presence of a native Barbadian head of state, as critically important as that is, but also by a profound commitment to social equality, participatory governance, national discipline and self-reliance, empathy with our fellow citizens, a commitment to champion and uphold universal human rights, and a determination to strive for the highest standards of collective achievement as a people. Can we commit to that mission? I say, let the journey of the Republic of Barbados begin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
On behalf of the staff and management of the National Library Service, we want to thank Mr. David Comissiong for presenting a very informative lecture. I'm sure all of you here would have gathered a lot from this lecture on Barbados becoming a republic. And as you go forward, you will share this information with others. So once again, I want to thank Mr. Comissiong for delivering this lecture. Thank you.